So let's get going. I think we used to have a bee class here at Fresno State. I found old syllabi for it dating back to like the 1980s. And I think there used to be a bee club. And so it seems that there used to be all sorts of bee programs, but it's not really here anymore. So what we're doing now is we are basically creating this new class, and the general purpose of this is, one, to provide you with a general overview of beekeeping. So we have a focus on bee biology, bee ecology, but also sort of the practical considerations of what it means to raise a hive. So we're going to walk through the basics of hive equipment, hive maintenance, seasonal hive fluctuations. And then also we're thinking about bees in the broader context of California agriculture. So here we're going to have almond bloom in about 3 to 4 weeks. And at that point, 90% of all hives in the country are going to pick up and ship themselves into California. It's going to be the largest migration of insects in the world. And so obviously bees play a huge role in California agriculture. We want to think about bees in that larger context as well. So we'll be meeting with bee brokers. You have an opportunity to go see people unloading bees from trucks here in the next couple of weeks. So lots of opportunities to engage with the bee industry over this course. So ideally you'll come out with a nice theoretical basis, but also some practical hands-on stuff. So this is probably also the smallest class any of you are ever going to have with me. Most of the time I'm teaching the IPM and entomology courses, which are both now 72 students. So this is going to be a little bit more of a personal class. So I'm going to do something I don't do in my other classes, which is I'd like to go around and hear some names and some background information. So mostly what I'd just like to hear is just give me your name. Basically, let's do a year, and let's do what experience do you have with bees in the past. So I'm Jake Wenger. Dr. Wenger, are you? And you've all had me before, so you know my contact information. Just so you know, my office hours this semester are from the end of this class until the beginning of IPM at 12:30, so roughly 9:30 to 11:30. But if you sort of swing in at that time, I'll be around. And if you've tried to talk to me in the past outside of class, it's pretty easy to make an appointment. Just shoot me an email. Talk to me after class, or if you swing by my office and the door's open or the light is on, usually that means I'm available. Just knock on the door or walk right in. If the door is closed, don't just walk right in, right? I ride my bike to work, and I have to change my clothes when I get in, and I have been walked in on, so that is my fault for not locking the door, but people should also knock. So there. Boy, we're already off to a really great start this semester. So beyond that, as far as my beekeeping experience is concerned, I have practically no beekeeping experience. So I'm just going to be right out there with that. This is going to be a learning experience for all of us. I feel I am qualified to teach this course in that I'm a trained entomologist. I have done a lot of research into bees. I've done bee research projects. But as far as maintaining a colony in my own time, being responsible for my own colonies, I haven't done that. So I don't consider myself an experienced beekeeper. And I'll admit that part of me teaching this class was I had a meeting with Dr. Bushoven. She said, transitioning you to full teaching load, what do you want to teach? And I said, well, I want to learn how to beekeep. So why don't I learn with a bunch of students? We can all help each other out. And so by the end of this, I think we'll all have a pretty good idea of what we're doing. But anyway, why don't we start down here with Ramiro?
My name is Ramiro Cardenas, and I'm a senior here at Fresno State. I basically don't have any experience with bees, just by seeing them in the fields, like raspberries and blackberries and watsonville. So I'm excited to learn about all of it.
My name is Eddie Rios. I'm an Apiculture major, and I'm a senior also. I really like bees. I've always been fascinated by them, and I really like honey. And I think making mead and honey one day would be really, really cool. So I want to learn more about it.
Hi everyone, my name is Pat. I don't have any experience with bees. Oh yeah, I forgot. I'm also a senior, except for swatting them, the ones that are outside my house, and then running in after. That's about it. But making honey wine, like you said, would be really cool. I really like Viking blood, so that's something I want to do in the future.
Viking blood.
Yeah, it's cherry infused with honey wine.
Really?
It's really good. Yeah, they sell it at Total Wine. It's fun.
I haven't seen it. Okay.
But yeah, that's about it for me.
Okay. I feel like most of my mead experience has been on the more negative side.
Go to Renaissance fairs. It will change your mind.
Renaissance fairs. Okay. They had some they were making in Ohio for a while. It was a hopped mead that was carbonated, so it's like a pseudo mead beer hybrid. That was pretty good. But either way. Anyway, that's off topic.
Hi, my name is Miguel. I'm a junior here at Fresno State. I have no experience with beekeeping, but I'm looking forward to learning a lot about bees.
I'm Eric. I'm a senior. I have no experience with bees other than getting stung by them.
Cool.
I'm Zacharias Lazaro. I also have no experience with bees other than being attacked by them and wasps. So I hope to make peace with them one day, but we'll see how that goes.
At least until the end of the semester.
Alright, my name's Edgar Tong, I'm a senior. I don't really have any experience with bees except one time at Reedley we put a suit on and just looked at the hives and then just being stung by them.
I'm Billy, senior, plant science, plant health. There's a beekeeper that keeps bees on the ranch where I work. So we have to make sure when we spray fields near there, we schedule with him to move his bees to different areas and stuff. But other than that, no experience.
Okay.
My name's Arlen Claudian, senior. Not too much background about bees, but I've ordered hives before for our ranches, so that's about it. I know what they do, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Fair enough.
Ignacio Mendoza, plant science, plant health. Not too much experience with bees, although I did work with Dr. Gonzalez for Plant 180, doing pre-care bees and seeing what was causing pollen collapse disorder. We sent that project off to Texas A&M, but since he left, I never pretty much heard back from it. Beyond that, I'm just fascinated with bees. I want to get some more.
My name's Eliseo Flores, senior, science, plant health. I have no experience with bees, following along with your time. I find out.
My name's Juan. I'm a senior as well. I have no experience with bees as well. And the only encounter I had with a beehive was when I was trucking with my uncle about 3 years ago. I found out what those boxes were.
My name is Michael. I'm a senior in plant health, and I have no experience with beekeeping, but I'm excited for it.
My name is Ricardo Gonzalez. I'm also a senior. I have no experience with bees, but
It's Mario. I'm a senior. I have no experience with bees, but really looking forward to the class, maybe starting my own colonies.
My name is Gil Rodriguez. I'm a fifth year, so not too much experience with bees, more than just what I encountered in the field with my really good friend. Her dad has like a really big, that's what he does, is beekeeping back in Colorado. So every summer she goes back and stuff like that and works on the farm. I told her about it, she's like, no, you've got to take this class. So.
Well, nice.
This is Toro. I'm a senior. I don't have any experience with bees other than we have hives at the research station I work at.
Are you on at Kearney, right?
No, FMC.
Oh, geez, FMC. Sure. They have hives. I guess that makes sense. Now let's see. I assumed. Uh-oh. No, I don't want to annotate. Let's try erasing. Oh, good. I hope that I can get rid of this stupid green line. Now the question now. There's an important lesson. That's not being recorded on the computer, so anything I write on the board will not be on the recordings that I post online. So I'll try and keep that in mind when I'm designing and the like. All right. Oh, howdy, Matt. This is Matt.
We're going
Do you have any practical bee experience? We're just kind of doing introductions.
practical bee experience.
Do you have any experience with bees beyond like being stung?
Yeah, I mean, I've been stung a few times, but I don't know. Just working around in the fields.
All right.
Pretty much.
All right, so it sounds like we're all about on the same page. None of us really have a whole lot of experience with bees, so this could be a really interesting experience for all of us. I guess one note. Does anybody know that they are allergic to bees? You are allergic to bees?
Yeah, but I used to be really allergic when I was younger, but now I got stung a couple times.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, I carry an EpiPen, but
You have an EpiPen. Okay, does anybody not know if they're allergic to bees? Like you haven't been stung in a while or anything? Yeah? You're going to need to get tested. I'm not comfortable taking people out into the field with bees if they don't know if they have an allergy. So either you need to be tested or you need to have an EpiPen with you if you are unsure of your allergy. We can talk about that. Luckily, we're not going to go out into the field with bees until the bees show up, which is going to be like late February. So we've got a little while to get that taken care of before we're going to be going out. But anyway, so because we are learning together, the way I've designed this course is I'm really trying to take advantage of local expertise. Here in the Central Valley and in California in general, it's kind of a real mecca for bees. I mean, there are so many specialty crops that require honeybee pollination that there's a lot of expertise around. So we're going to be taking advantage of a lot of these various groups. The Central Valley Beekeepers Association is a resource I've really tried to tap into. MND Honey, Mike Tolmachoff used to be the president of the California Beekeepers Association, and he's just up in Madera. He's a local bee broker and beekeeper, so he's going to be coming in and giving a couple guest lectures. He's also shipping in a semi-truck of bees here in the next couple weeks, and he has offered anyone in the class who wants to see bees getting unloaded from a semi to come along. I think it's going to be at like 6 in the morning, though. So I'll give you more information as we get a little bit closer to that. Shannon Bueller from Cooperative Extension, Rocky Cunin and Bayer Crop Science, Project APISM, which is a bee conservation group. Billy Sink is coming in. Daydant and Sons, which is a beekeeping supply company that's based here in, well, not based here, they have a showroom here in Fresno. All these people are going to be chipping in. So hopefully when you come out of this class, not only are you going to have a basic background in bees and some experience with beekeeping, you're also going to have a lot of professional connections in this industry. So that if you were to go out and get involved in beekeeping, whether that is taking more of an advanced role in keeping bees at work, or if you decide to become a backyard hobbyist beekeeper, then you're going to have some people to fall back on, or at least you'll know the right numbers to call if you have a question. So, beyond that, we're also going to try and really tap into, basically we're going to try and really take advantage of opportunities to get out of the classroom and interacting with bees. So we have some opportunities to do hive observations. Shannon Mueller is going to walk us through a hive strength inspection, so the basic inspection that people do to make sure that their hives are fighting fit. Touring Daydant, doing some applied research demonstrations at Bayer Crop Science. And then beyond that, I'm trying to also load this up with some extracurricular activities. So things that you can do outside of the classroom to expand your understanding of beekeeping. These are purely optional, but basically by participating in these, you have the opportunity to learn more about the functional mechanics of beekeeping, but also opportunities to earn some extra credit if you're interested in extra credit. So just tapping into a few of those extra credit options. The first of which is Central Valley Beekeeper Association Meetings, the CVBA. This was a group that was established in 1960 as sort of a spin-off of the California Beekeepers Association. And their main purpose is to support local beekeepers at every level, what they call hobbyists, which would be somebody who has a handful of backyard bee hives, up to commercial people who have several thousand hives. I'm honestly not sure what a sideline beekeeper is, but we'll find out. But either way, they have monthly meetings, and generally at these meetings, they'll have a little bit of business to discuss because they are a group. they'll have a guest speaker come on, and then they also have a raffle for various bee supplies that have been donated by the beekeepers. So it's kind of what you'd expect. There's beeswax candles, there's bee t-shirts, there's honey, there's all that sort of stuff. They'll have bee brushes, hive tools, all sorts of stuff. But so, if you're interested in attending a meeting, there's one tonight. Their January meeting is tonight. It's at the Brooks Ranch Restaurant, which is on South Chestnut Avenue here in Fresno. Basically, what you would do is you would hop the 99 and just keep going south and south and south until you're just barely in Fresno city limits, and there's this truck stop looking restaurant off to the side of the road called Brooks Ranch, and that's where they have the meeting. If you show up, 6 o'clock is sort of a dinner and social hour. If you want to just attend the meeting, you would just come in right around 7, and that's when they'll actually start going through business and the like. And if you attend these, that's 1 point of extra credit, which is effectively 1% of the grade. So there will be at least 4 of these over the course of the semester, so you could potentially get up to 4% boost just based off of attending those.
Are you gonna be there, or how do we prove that we're there?
I am planning at being at these. If I am not at these, what you'll do, right, is you take your phone, you take a selfie of yourself with all the beekeepers in the background. It's a very distinctive restaurant, and honestly, beekeepers are very distinctive people. So it's an interesting crowd. So I don't think that'll be a problem. Other opportunities coming up. There are 2 interesting opportunities that cost a little bit of money, so they're not mandatory, but again, you can attend if you like. One of them is the Beekeepers Symposium. This is put on by the CVBA, and basically the idea is, in January, February, March, basically the vast majority of America's beekeepers are here in California moving bees around. And so the CVBA says, well, if all these beekeepers are here in California already, why don't we just have a big symposium and everybody gets around and they talk about what they've been seeing. So they talk about research, they talk about what they've been seeing in their own hives, and it's just a really great time to get together and to figure out what's going on. So they host this symposium. It's at Day Danton Sons showroom here in Fresno, and it's about $30 a ticket. That includes lunch and a full day of talks. It's on Saturday, February 23rd. So coming up here in a few weeks. If you go to the CVBA meeting tonight, I'm sure they'll talk about this. And honestly, I think if I talk to the guys at CVBA, they can cut us a deal where the students don't have to pay the full $30 either. So if you're interested, this is another one where extra credit is offered if you go. And then the last of the upcoming events is the Beekeeping Short Course. Now this is a really cool opportunity. This is a short course that's been taught by UC Cooperative Extension and CVBA for at least a decade. It's getting up there. Regardless, what this is it's a 1-day short course on practical beekeeping. So the idea is you come in, they have a whole bunch of talks from 9 in the morning till 4 p.m. of practicing beekeepers who are going to go through all the basics for maintaining your hives. So they'll go through equipment, they'll go through handling the bees, how to avoid stings, how to manage the honey, how to do bee checks. It's basically this course but concentrated down into 1 day, and they don't have any of the basic bee biology stuff. So just a neat opportunity to get a lot of hands-on experience right up here at the front end of the semester. Downside is it does cost $55, and that's if you do early registration. So again, not mandatory, but if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, you can attend. That being said, a bunch of the guest speakers who are in this are also the guest speakers who are coming here for this class. So a bunch of the talks are by Shannon Mueller, Mike Tolmachoff, and Rocky Cunin, who are all going to be guest speakers here. So you're probably going to get a fair bit of similar information between the two. The advantage of this would be some hands-on experience as well. Cool. Any question about all this stuff I just went through? All right. And if you're interested, this PowerPoint is up on Blackboard. Same deal as previous semesters where you've had me. I post the PowerPoints, there's missing information, you fill them in. That's just to encourage you to actually watch the presentations and not just try and study off of the PowerPoints for the exams. Cool. So course structure. The class is roughly divided into 3 major sections, which are divided by exams. So basically, we go through a section, you have an exam on that topic, and then we jump into a new section, and you have exams on those. So the first major section is bee biology. We want to learn as much as we can about honeybee hives, because beekeeping is functionally applied bee biology and bee ecology. If you understand how bees work, if you understand how the bee society works, you can make decisions to better manage them. So we'll be covering things like honeybee diversity, sort of what's the difference between, say, European honeybees and Africanized bees versus, say, any number of subgroups within those. Sociality and hive structure, the major cycles of the colony. After that, the second third will be introductory beekeeping. So we'll be really getting into the practical aspects of keeping hives. So tools and equipment, seasonal maintenance, pests and bee IPM, so keeping your bees healthy. And then finally, we'll jump into larger topics in beekeeping. So basically, what are the products that we get from bees? So we'll do honey extraction. We'll talk about beeswax, pollination services. We'll have Mike come in and talk about being a bee broker and basically helping people find bees and selling hives and nukes and packages and stuff like that. Having Rocky come in and talk about bees and pesticides. So what are the regulations you need to know to keep your bees safe on a farm, or to, as was mentioned, how you would contact the people who maybe have hives in your particular blocks. All right, assessment. This class is easy to figure out your grade. It's just out of 100 points. So if you can figure out your percentages based off of 100, which you all should be able to do, then you're fine. The majority of the grade comes from the 3 exams that we have over the course. Basically, 3 exams over the course of the semester, roughly equidistant from each other. They correspond to the 3 major sections, and each of them is worth 25 points. So 25, 25, 25, 75. Attendance participation is also a chunk of the grade, that's 15 points. Because the course is going to be heavily dependent on guest speakers, so I may not be able to get recordings of, outdoor demonstrations, which again I cannot record, or even classroom discussion-based things, it's important that we have people here, and I'm not sitting here talking to like 7 folks out of 17. So basically, the way participation works is each of you has 15 points right now, full participation. If you miss a day of class, you lose half a point. There are 30 lectures, so if you conceivably did not come any day of the semester, you would lose all 30 points, or all 15 points, right? That being said, I understand that there are some days you're just going to miss, and that can't be helped, so you do have 2 free passes over the course of the semester. So if you have something you need to do and you just can't miss it, you can miss the class and you won't have any, suffer any point loss from that.
What are the tests look like? How are they going to be revised?
That's a little hard to say right now. That's going to depend on sort of the materials. I'm going to guess it's going to look similar to my past exams that you've taken. So it's going to be multiple choice, probably a bit of matching, and short and long essays. So probably a real mix of those things. And it's also going to depend on section. Probably bee biology is going to be a little bit more in the area of multiple choice and matching. But as we get into this stuff that's a little bit more conceptual, that's probably going to be more like essays. And then lastly, the last assignment is this Bees in the News presentation. Functionally, what these are is it's my substitute for the interesting insect of the day. The basic idea is that bees are in the news all the time. There's a lot of information floating around about bees. People are always talking about bees and pesticides, bee health, how important bees are to agriculture, how good bee stings are for you, how if you eat a little pinch of pollen every day, you'll never ever die. There's all sorts of business out there about bees. And it's more information than I could ever cover in class. So at the beginning of every lecture, we're going to have a little 5-minute blurb where a student is going to tell us about some story in the news that they found about bees. That's worth 10 points, so 10% of the grade. Yeah, and this starts next week. So, got a sign-up sheet. Basically, the basic idea is that if your day is coming up to present, you need to tell me of your topic at least 24 hours in advance so that I can veto it if it's a piece of crap. Basically, if you send me like a BuzzFeed article like 7 ways that bees can cure cancer, you know, number 5 will blow your mind, I'm going to say, find a new article, right? I don't expect that to be a problem, but I reserve the right to veto ideas. So you need to send me the article at least 24 hours in advance so I can look it over and give you the okay. The article should be from a reputable source. So reputable source basically just means vetted journalism. So it could be a major journalism source, whether that's like a TV network, it could be a major newspaper, a magazine, quality websites. I'm not super duper picky, but again, don't give me clickbait. That's the major goal. And it can cover any aspect of bees. It doesn't even have to be honeybees. As long as it is about bees, I would say I'd even accept stories about maybe wasps. We could go broadly into social hymenoptera. So you could do wasps, you could probably do ants. But the major point is to find an article about bees, whether it's laws and regs, bee health, pollination services, economics, bee products, whatever. The point is to learn more about bees and to learn about stuff that I may not cover in class. So, yeah. Then you'll give a 5-minute presentation summarizing the article. That's the main goal, to go over the arc of the article, share all the relevant information. And you are allowed to use whatever resources you see fit. So you could use PowerPoint, Google Slides, you could use the whiteboard, you could just stand up here and talk. That's all perfectly fine. Just keep in mind that you are getting graded for it, so put a little bit of effort into your presentation at least, right? Cool. So, what I've got here is a sign-in sheet. Basically, find an empty slot and put your name into it. If there's an NA in a slot, that means that is not available. Those are either guest lectures, where I can't guarantee there will be time at the beginning to do a presentation. April 2nd is an NA because I'm going to be in San Diego for the ESA conference, so that'll be a recorded lecture that you'll watch at your own time. But basically the point is, fill in a spot. I think there are 18 spots total, and there are 17 people in this class. So if you're really careful, y'all can avoid doing next Tuesdays. And this is just going to be the penalty for sitting in the back on the first day of class. Cool, the textbook. Does anyone have the textbook yet? No.
I ordered it.
Hey, there we go. So, I chose Karen and Connor's Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping. Now, if you go to the bookstore, they do not have it. The reason for this is it's published by a really small publisher in Delaware, and they have a ridiculous return policy. So the bookstore doesn't want to buy a whole bunch of these and not be able to return things that aren't purchased. So basically, if you go to the bookstore, they will order you a copy, and you can pick it up later. So you're almost better off just ordering your own copy. Now, I apologize for the cost. It's not the cheapest textbook. It's also not the most expensive, but it is $55. I saw some on Amazon the other day used for $32. So you can get it. Sorry?
I seen one for $39.
$39? Okay. So you can find them a little cheaper. The impression I have is that there's not a lot of resale on these, and I think the reason is that it's actually a pretty good book. It's not totally useless like a lot of textbooks are. Actually, the reason I went with this textbook was I did a lot of reading online, and this one has been widely recommended not just by academics, but also by beekeepers. A lot of beekeepers say that this is their go-to first line of information when they are encountering a problem in the hive. It's a really nice general overview of basic biology and basic principles. It's considered very introductory, so it gives you a nice general overview. And then if you need more information, you can go to other more detailed side books. So this is a nice book that if you're planning on keeping bees, you should have anyway. And judging from the fact that they're selling for $39, you're going to make a good chunk of your money back if you decide to get rid of it. So please get the book. More or less what we're going to be doing is walking through the book for the first part of the semester anyway, so having it will be helpful. Now, if you don't want to wait and order it, you can also buy it in person here in Fresno from Dedant. So, Dedant is like probably one of the larger bee supply realtors in the country, and they have one store in California, and it's here on Winery Avenue in Fresno, just south of campus. So, relatively easy to get to. They have this book on the shelf right now. I believe it's $55. So if you really want to pick up a book quickly, you can just drive down there and visit the showroom. And I'm sure if you tell them you're taking the class, they'll be happy to talk to you, but they probably won't make it any cheaper. So, sorry. I don't have that much sway. Okay, odds and ends before we get into the actual information of the class. A lot of this stuff is similar to the other courses you've taken with me. As far as absences are concerned, if you're going to miss class and you don't want to lose your participation points, or if you're going to miss an exam or something like that, that is fine as long as you have a legitimate excuse. I keep that pretty broad. Illnesses, job interviews. Almost all of you are seniors, so I anticipate job interviews happening. Conference attendance, court dates, jury duty, funerals, all of those things are excused. You just need to give me some sort of written excuse. A conference program, a doctor's note, right? Whatever. Just let me know that it actually happened, and I'm more than happy to allow you to retake exams for odds and ends like that. As far as presentations are concerned, because we basically have the exact number of students for the exact number of presentations, if you are going to miss your presentation day, you need to make arrangements with another student to trade. All right? If you can't do that, then we don't really have the ability to make up presentations without digging into class time, and so that'll be inexcused. And you won't have an opportunity to make up those 10 points. Any questions about the class structure, class information, all of that before we jump in?
When we go to the field or on site or when we go someplace, is it going to be during this class period?
So, yes, if we're, say, going to do a hive inspection, that's going to be during class time. So if you take a look at the syllabus, which again is on Blackboard, you'll see there are a couple days where we have activities like we're going to the orchard to look at hives. We're going to have Shannon Mueller come in and give us a hive inspection lesson. Odds and ends like that. All of those are going to be during class time. So basically, it'll be like, I'll probably send out an email or I'll make an announcement in class saying, hey, next Tuesday we're going to be in the orchards, just meet us out there, right? That sort of deal. But if there's something like a CVBA meeting where obviously we can't do it during class time, those are basically, if it's something that's outside of class time, it's extra credit, it's not mandatory. So I'm not going to force you to go somewhere outside of class. So anyway, this will be an interesting class. So let's jump into an actual lesson. So this is testable material. I know, we're starting out with testable material on the first day, but oh well, what can you do? So, a question that I hear semi-regularly is it honeybee or is it honeybee? 2 words or 1 word, right? And if you're typing up a document in Microsoft Word and you type honeybee 2 words, they'll put a little red line under it and they'll say, don't you mean honeybee? All 1 word? I'm like, no, I'm not. Because In this course, as with all courses here, we follow the Entomological Society of America naming rules for insects. And so, according to the ESA guidelines, when you are talking about an insect, if that species is a true example of that particular taxon, the taxon is written separately. So what does that mean? Basically that means if you have an insect and it's called something like a stink bug, or a honeybee, or a house fly, where part of the name is the insect's taxon, right? So a honeybee is a bee. So you would write honeybee separately, because honey describes what the bee is. It is a bee that produces honey. If it is a bumblebee, that's separate, because it is a bee that bumbles. House flies, black flies, true flies, they are all actually flies, so you write the two names separately. House fly, black fly, true fly. All those things are separate. On the flip side, if a species is not a true example of that taxon, the names are combined. So for example, if you have a name that might be two names, like yellow jacket. A yellow jacket is a hymenoptera. It is a wasp. It is not a jacket, a piece of clothing, right? So you combine those. Yellow jacket, one word. Oh, my session is about to expire. Cool. Silverfish is not a fish, so that's one word. A navel orangeworm is not an actual worm, it is a caterpillar, so orangeworm is combined into one word. That's just a general convention that you will see in entomology, is that if it's the correct taxon in the name, two words. If it's not, one word. Basic idea. So that's honeybee versus honeybee. Another question that I hear sometimes is, what is the difference between beekeeping, apiculture, and bee culture? And this is one where it really doesn't matter. Beekeeping, apiculture, and bee culture are all just different names for the same thing, which is basically managing bee populations for agricultural purposes. So, in general, the names have different connotations and different use areas. Beekeeping is definitely the most common term. It's the term that is used most by professionals. So if you're talking, I mean, we have like the Central Valley Beekeepers Association. They're not the Central Valley Apiculture Association. They use beekeeper as their term. Apiculture is not as commonly used, but you'll hear it commonly in scientific publications. Apiculture is the more scientific name, so you'll hear that a fair bit. And then bee culture is just a hybrid of those two terms. And it's not used very often, but you will see it every once in a while. It's also the name of a really popular beekeeping magazine. As popular as beekeeping magazines get. But point being, I wanted to make sure that if you came across these terms, just so you'd be aware that it's not like bee culture is substantially different from beekeeping or from apiculture. They're all just the same thing. Cool. So let's jump into what it is we'll actually be learning about this semester. What is apiculture? Apiculture is the management of bee colonies by humans. That's it. That's the basic idea. And generally, apiculture is taking care of bees within the genus Apis. So that's why it's apiculture, because it is Latin. You would pronounce this Apis as opposed to Apis. So sometimes you'll hear people say apiculture. It's one of those things where it doesn't matter, so don't bother correcting people. But the correct pronunciation is apiculture. And most commonly, the bee that people are taking care of is the European honeybee, Apis mellifera. So just a little fun fact, the name Melissa, right? Melissa is rooted in the Greek word for bee, mellifera. So Melissa generally translates to honeybee. Jeez, I got thinking about, what is butterfly in Spanish? Is that Maricopa?
Mariposa.
Mariposa, thank you. Maricopa is that little town up on the way to Yosemite. Mariposa, yeah. So that's another insect name that you sometimes see people named after. All right. Honeybee management. Apiculture typically is performed in human-built hives. So there are people who will scavenge honey from the wild. That's generally not considered apiculture. And apiculture is usually done for agricultural purposes. So there's any number of agricultural purposes you could be pursuing. You could be trying to provide pollination services. You might be collecting the products made by the bees, pollen, honey, beeswax, royal jelly. And you might also be raising bees purely for the purpose of selling the bees to other beekeepers. So maybe you're a bee breeder, which is a whole industry unto itself, and we'll talk about towards the end of the semester. But point being that generally, to be a true beekeeper, there's an intention of collecting products. It is done in some sort of man-made hive. It's typically done with Apis mellifera. So functionally, what you're doing is you are managing the population. You're managing the colony. You are providing the bees with a protected space to hide. You are discouraging negative behavior, such as swarming. So you're trying to discourage your bees from swarming and leaving the colony that you provided. Or if they do swarm, you're trying to encourage them to jump into an empty hive, so you now have 2 colonies. And you're also trying to encourage the natural instinct to collect resources and keep them in one place. So functionally, beekeeping is a lot like plant-based agriculture, at least in my mind. You're basically following all the same rules. You are providing a sheltered space. So when you are growing plants, right, you're providing them with a field, you're providing them with a greenhouse, you're providing them with some space that is theirs. You are discouraging negative behavior. So for example, in say vines or orchards, we do a lot of pruning to discourage vegetative growth, and by doing so, we also encourage the abundance of the resource we actually want to harvest. So functionally, a lot of things we talk about in plant-based agriculture carry over to bees. We're just dealing with an animal instead of a plant. And much like plants, we expect a cyclical seasonal cycle. And I already touched on this, so I'll just glaze over this. This is functionally the same picture that I've got right here, except this one includes the adult population on a dotted line and the brood population, the immature bees, on a solid line. But functionally, we see the same thing, which is that bee colonies typically have a seasonal low point in the winter time. In the tropics, if you do beekeeping, the low point is typically in the winter, or I'm sorry, the rainy season, since they basically just have dry season, rainy season. But the rainy season or the winter is when they're low. When the flowers come out, we see a nectar flow, here highlighted in blue, where the populations grow quickly, there's abundant resources, the bees collect a ton of nectar, make a ton of honey. And then they slowly decline as the season progresses into the next winter. So during that nectar flow, 2 important things happen in the world of beekeeping. The 2 major things you have to keep your eye out on. The first of which is, this is when the storage of excess resources occurs. So this is when most of your honey and pollen are going to be stored. This is when you're going to be collecting honey, extracting it, just trying to keep ahead of the bees as much as possible. This is also the period where the populations are growing the fastest. So this is when large colonies are going to try and divide by swarming. So this is also the time where you're keeping an eye on your colonies, making sure that you don't lose half your bees as you progress. So this is sort of the busy time of management for the keepers. Consequently, a lot of modern beekeeping is just trying to extend this nectar flow as long as possible. So taking bees from crop to crop to crop to crop so that they always have abundant resources and you're going to be able to harvest honey and sell pollination services for as long a period of time as possible. And because we now have the ability to just throw bees on the back of a semi-trailer, it's relatively easy to do that. So, that being said, one important point I would like to make is that where apiculture differs from traditional agriculture is that bees are not domesticated. A domesticated animal or a domesticated plant cannot grow on its own without human intervention. So, if a bunch of cows escaped from a dairy farm, they wouldn't survive in the wild for very long as a population. or a bunch of chickens. Chickens especially, right? Because a lot of these chickens are bred for huge breasts and they can hardly walk. They would not survive for much more than a week or two roaming around in Fresno because we have city coyotes and things like that, and dogs and cats and all that. But if bees swarm and escape from the colony, they're going to be fine. They'll just become part of the feral population. They will build a nest in a local structure. That'd be a tree, a house, a hollow log, whatever. And they'll basically just live out their lives happily. They don't need us. Consequently, bees don't require daily care or maintenance like a crop does or like an animal does in animal-based agriculture. Consequently, you could just sort of put bees out there and ignore them for weeks or months on end, and they generally will be fine. You may have some health problems crop up, but generally they are independent, which makes them relatively easy to manage in your spare time. All right, so we'll jump through some beekeeping history, and then we'll call it a day. So, bees have generally always been of interest to humans as best we can tell. Before there was the cultivation of sugarcane or sugar beets, bees were pretty much the only source of concentrated sugar for humans. So honey was the primary sweetener of human diet, except arguably in North America where they didn't have domesticated honeybees, they did maple syrup instead. But either way, point being that for a long time, if you wanted sugar, you had to have bees. Beyond that, beeswax, bee venom, honey, pollen, all the things that came from beehives were important resources in medicines, in lubricants, polishes, candles, all sorts of things. So basically, bees were a tremendous resource for people for a very long time. And bees also are generally of social interest. I think people are interested in bees because bees are social like us. They live in groups, they have jobs, they're very industrious. You can kind of see this in our culture where you'll see sayings like, busy as a bee, is right a slogan of industriousness and is considered a good thing. A less common saying that you'll hear sometimes is something lazy as a drone, which is a reference to the male bees in the colony which don't work, they're useless, except for they're good at reproducing, so it's an interesting gig. But anyway, point being that people are well aware of how honeybees work, and they can draw comparisons between humans and bees pretty regularly. And beyond that, people also looked at honeybees, and for a long time, they recognized the fact that queen bees got this special stuff called royal jelly, right? And people thought, well, if I eat royal jelly, it'll make me more regal. And so, people basically looked at bees, they recognized bee structure, and they sort of applied lessons from bees to themselves. And so, people are interested in bees on more than just a functional, ooh, I like honey, sort of level. And I think a lot of this fascination is really evident in just sort of how pervasive bees are in our culture. Bees have been a regular emblem on coins that have been distributed. Let's see what we got here. We got some modern Canadian currency. This one was a coin from the Civil War era. English coins. This is the Mormons used to mint their own coins when they first settled Utah? I didn't. So this is Mormon script. I also didn't realize they had their own script. So there we go. This isn't Mormon keeping class. This is beekeeping. So we'll jump further ahead. All right. And so it's believed that the first interactions that humans had with bees was just simply bee robbing, basically finding a wild hive and stealing honey from it. And there's actually evidence that chimpanzees do this nowadays, so we sort of have a model for how early humans may have stolen honey. Chimpanzees will they have a whole range of sticks of different sizes and shapes that they will use. What they'll do is they'll crawl up a tree to where a honeybee hive is, and they use a perforator, which is a long, thin stick with a pointy end, to stab holes in the hive. They've got enlargers and pounders, which are used for breaking the hive open or enlarging the holes that they produce. And then they've got these collectors, which are basically trees or shrubs they pull out of the ground. So they have bushy root balls at the bottom, and they'll insert those into the hive, swish them around to collect honey on the roots, and then pull that out and eat the honey off of that. So other animals recognize that honey is delicious and go after it as well. And so bee robbing is believed to have been sort of the basic way that people went after honey for a long time. And bee robbing is actually still common practice in parts of Central Asia, where they have the giant honeybee variety. This is, I believe, Apis dorsalis. I'll have to look up that name again. But basically, these are very large honeybees. They're about 1 inch long. And they build single, very large combs on tree branches and commonly in parts of the Himalayas on the sides of cliffs. And so the way that people will harvest these bees is basically they'll crawl down a ladder and they'll have a great big long stick and a great big long stick with a basket on the end. And they'll take that basket and they'll wedge it up underneath the beehive and they'll put a bunch of smoke out in the air to calm the bees down. And then they'll take their long stick and they'll just sort of smack the hive until chunks fall off into their basket. And that's how they harvest the honey. So here we have some people climbing down the ladders. You can see they're harvesting sticks. And these, I mean, honestly, look at these things. Gigantic beehives hanging off the sides of these cliffs. So I believe all these guys are from Nepal. They're all wearing bee suits in these pictures. But if you're more of a traditional style, you don't have a ladder, you have a rope with knots in it, and you don't wear anything protective. You just use smoke. Actually, I can touch on that real quick. We'll talk about smoke later. But the basic idea is if you puff smoke onto honeybees, honeybees will basically believe there is a fire. And so they will go into their escape response, which is that they go and they collect a whole bunch of honey, they consume it, and try and build up their energy reserves in case they need to fly out of the hive and protect the queen. And by consuming so much honey, it'll actually pacify them. It'll make them kind of fat and happy for a little while. So you can kind of puff them with the smoke, and they'll chill out on the comb, and you can handle them and take care of it.
Isn't there nicotine?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that'd be very good for the bees.
I heard that one time.
If you were blowing your cigarette smoke onto the bees. I don't know. I know I'm not going to fill my smoker up with cigarettes, though. That's an expensive way to keep bees. All right. So as far as humans are concerned, we have evidence from as long as 10,000 years ago that humans were robbing bees. Sort of a famous example is in Valencia, Spain. There's this is a reproduction, but a cave painting of a human robbing a beehive in a tree. So they got their little collecting bucket, a whole bunch of bees buzzing around being angry. There's some evidence of that. There's evidence on pottery all over the Middle East and Europe to this fact, as well as Northern Africa. And the earliest evidence of bee domestication is about 4,500 years ago in Egypt. There are hieroglyphics in what used to be the ancient Egyptian capital, Luxor. A temple in the capital, Luxor. But either way, in that hieroglyphic, they have depictions of humans collecting honey and using smoke to pacify bees in what appeared to be traditional clay pot-based hives that they have built. And that's sort of what we're looking at here. Here's a guy, and these right here are the bee hives. They're just sort of narrow clay cylinders, and we've got a whole bunch of bees chilling out. But yeah, so basically some evidence of actual intentional beekeeping. And the way they used to keep bees in ancient Egypt was you would have these little clay cylinders. They're either made of clay. It's possible that sometimes they're made out of wicker that's coated with clay or dung. And then they would stack these up into rows as high as 8 beehives. I think they say that walls like this are actually still commonplace in much of the Middle East and North Africa. It's sort of a traditional way to keep these bees. You can have up to 500 hives in one of these walls. But either way, these hives take advantage of the fact that bees tend to separate the parts of their hive where they rear brood, basically where they grow new honeybees, from the sections where they produce honey and leave it for storage. And in a hive like this, what bees will do is they'll put all their brood near the entrance, and they'll store all the honey in the combs in the back. So what the Egyptians would do is they would provide these spaces for bees, they would encourage them to live in them, they would let the bees go out there, collect honey and the like, and then when they wanted to harvest, they would remove the back of the hive. So you see all these little plugs in these ones, those are the backs of the hives. They'd pull those plugs out, then they would blow smoke into the hive to pacify the bees, and they would just reach in the back and they'd pull out all those back combs with the honey in it. And that's how they would end up getting honey without disturbing all of the bees in the hive. And this is actually still common practice in the Middle East. This is their best system. And here we have the actual picture from Luxor, where you can see here are the hives all stacked up. And this is a guy with like a primitive smoker. He's got like a bowl with some material that's smoldering. And it looks like they're blowing the smoke in the direction of the hives. All right. Oh, and there's also evidence that the Egyptians would sometimes load up a bunch of these beehives onto their donkeys and carry them out to the fields during flowering time. So they were well aware of the fact that the bees and the crops were related to one another. But let's jump into some more modern beekeeping. In Europe, bees were primarily kept in structures that we called skeps. And this is sort of the traditional beehive that you've seen, right? Everybody's seen this sort of beehive depicted in pictures, in Winnie the Pooh and things like that. Either way. Basically, what a skep is, it's a wicker basket that's turned upside down with a hole in it for the bees to come in and out of. The idea is that the bees will build their hive inside that wicker basket, they have some protection, and you can then harvest from it. This was definitely the most common way that bees were kept across much of Europe up until the modern age. And you can actually see this in a lot of European architecture. It was commonplace that if you were building a stone house or a stone wall in Europe, that you would intentionally build little nooks like this into the walls of whatever structure it was, so that you could keep skeps inside of those. So this is a skep nook. This is a modern-made skep, but that's pretty true to the architecture. And then this is what it looks like when the bees build their combs inside the skep. So you can see they just sort of pack the whole thing as densely as they can. The other major hive that we would see and still see to this day is what's called a bee gum. And basically a bee gum is just a hive made from a hollow tree. So in forested areas, bees will naturally build their hives inside hollow trees. Back in the day, what people would do is they would go out, and if they found a tree with a beehive in it, they would just like carve their name into the tree and basically say, "This is my bees, don't mess with them." And then people basically figured out, well, I can just cut this tree down and I can take these bees with me, or maybe the tree dies, and so they'll cut the top off and they'll put a little roof on it to protect the bees. And eventually it evolved into this, where people just have a whole bunch of hollow logs with holes drilled in them that they keep on their farm that the bees live inside of. And so you see this in Central Europe, especially Poland and Germany. These were very common, and southeastern United States. Actually, in the southeastern United States, that's where the name bee gum comes from, because these were made almost exclusively from gum trees. Now, there are some major issues with bee gums and skeps that really held back beekeeping for a long time. The first major issue is that you can't inspect combs for disease or pests. If you want to look at the combs inside a skep or a gum, you have to tilt the whole thing upside down and look at it, and you can only see the stuff that's on the bottom. So if there's a problem up at the top of the hive where the honey is, you're out of luck. And for this reason, skeps are actually illegal in the US. You're not allowed to keep bees in skeps because they were a major source of disease transmission. Similarly, it's difficult to harvest honey without destroying the colony, because the hives are packed so tightly, and in vertical hives, such as a skep is, you can see it's structured vertically, the bees tend to keep their brood at the bottom and the honey at the top. You can't get to the honey without tearing all that brood comb out. And so more or less every time you harvest, you're going to kill your bees, or you're going to cause them to find a new home, which is problematic. And typically what people would do is they would drive the bees out with smoke, or they would get some sulfur and they'd burn it underneath the hive and just kill the bees before they harvested the honey. So that was not ideal. So a solution that people came up with was that they organized the hives vertically so that they knew that the brood would be at the bottom, the honey would be at the top. And what they would do is keepers would just place a second hollow gum or skep basket on top of the existing skep or gum. And the idea is that the bees would move up into that new cavity and they would exclusively store honey in that topmost part of the cavity. So they would keep all their brood in the bottom, in the original skep. They'd put all the honey in the top. That way, you could just remove that second container, and it would have nothing but honey in it. And that way, you could always keep the bees in the bottom part of the skep. Nice and easy. So the second container was held above the original hive. It was considered to be superior to the hive, meaning it's on top of. Consequently, the practice of putting a second box on top was called supering. That's going to be important mostly because in modern beekeeping, the topmost boxes that are full of honey are called the supers. So that's something we'll bump into as we get into beekeeping as it is now. And the nice thing about this, right, is basically you can pull the super off, you can harvest all the honey, pop it back on, and you aren't going to damage the actual colony. My goodness, who wants to talk to me? So, this is an example of some supering. Here we have the skep. You can see the top of the skep and the bottom are two separate structures. So this would be the colony part of the skep, and this would be the super. And this is an example of supering on a gum, where basically you've got your gum on the bottom, and they've got a actual conventional bee box put on the top for supering. All right. I'll keep going until the end. I only have 3 minutes. So, I mentioned earlier that honeybees aren't native to the United States, to America in general. It appears that there used to be honeybees in sort of the range of tens of thousands of years ago, but they're gone now. So honeybees had to be introduced to America. Consequently, honeybees are relatively new. They were introduced with European colonization, so we see them showing up in the 1600s in the US. And honestly, bees have been in California for less than 200 years. So it's a relatively new species here. All right. So why don't we jump into the golden age of beekeeping? We'll probably just cover bee space. So, basically for millennia, or at least for centuries, since the development of the bee skep, honey beekeeping didn't really progress in any part of the world. You had a situation where you could harvest the honey through supers without damaging the hive, but a lot of people didn't bother with supers. It was a lot of extra work. So for the most part, people would collect new colonies every spring. They would keep them in the hive, and then they would kill them during the harvesting process, which is not really ideal. That's a big use of resources to get honey. During the 1800s, we saw some huge advances in beekeeping that allowed us to shift over to what we do now. And I'd say there are basically 3 major discoveries or technology advancements that allowed us to get there. The first of which is the discovery of what we call bee space. So bee space is a bit of an abstract concept, but the basic idea is bee space describes what bees do with spaces in the hive, depending on how wide they are. So basically, bee space specifically is the amount of space a bee requires to crawl between 2 structures. And the idea is, if you have a gap in the hive that is larger than 3/8 of an inch, what bees are going to do is they're going to bridge the gap between those 2 structures with comb. And we call that bridge comb. And that's what you see right here. We have 2 hanging frames in a hive. They've been spaced a little too far apart for the bees. So what the bees have done is they've made a comb in between those 2 frames. That's a bridge. On the flip side, if a gap is really small, less than 1/4 of an inch, bees can't fit in it. And what they'll do is they'll fill it with something called propolis. Propolis is also known as bee glue. It's basically a sealant made out of plant resins that the bees collect and store in their gut. And that's what's going on right here. Along the edge of this frame, you can see all that sticky-looking orange stuff. That's propolis. And so why does bee space matter? Well, once people discovered that bees do very specific things with sort of specific size ranges, it allowed them to design hives where you could encourage the bees to build predictable patterns of comb. Consequently, you could have uniform combs instead of stuff like we saw in the Skeps, where the bees basically just randomly fill the space with a whole bunch of combs. Instead, we could put structures in there to encourage them to build something predictable. With that, it's 9:20, so I'm all out of time. Next week on Tuesday, we will jump into Langstroth and the Langstroth hive, which is arguably the single greatest development in beekeeping.